بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله الأمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We begin inshallah today discussing the chapter that deals with different types of prayers, such as the prayers of the Eid. And as you all know, as Muslims, we have two Eids every year, and one Eid that is recurrent and it takes place every week, but it is not considered to be a Eid as such where people celebrate, but it is called Eid because linguistically Eid is something that comes time after time, and it can be called to describe things that happen time bound, and it also can be describing something that people go to, or a location that people go to. So Eid can also be considered to be related to time or to location. Now here we are only referring to time, because when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, he found the people of Medina celebrating a day of the non-Muslims. So the Prophet told them ﷺ, he told them that Allah has substituted you with two better days. Allah has replaced these days of the pre-Islamic era with 2 days for you to celebrate throughout the year, and that is Eid al-Fitr wa Eid al-Adha, the Eid of Fitr, which comes after the month of Ramadan, and Eid al-Adha, which is on the 10th day of the last month of the year, the month of Dhul Hijjah. And Islam is a simple religion that is suitable to all times and all locations. And the majority of the rulings in Islam are based, regarding time, are based on observing the moon and observing the sun. We need the sun to know what times we can pray at. So the times of prayers are decided, are distinguished, are known by observing the sun, as we've stated that before. And we need the crescent, we need the moon, so that we know when the months start, because in Islam we only use the Hijri calendar, which is based on the lunar months. We do not use the Gregorian calendar, because no one knows what day this is without referring to the calendar, which is made by a handful of astrologists or astronomers or whatever. But in Islam we can know and we can identify which day approximately today is by observing the moon. Throughout observing the moon, we know when Eid al-Fitr is, we know when Eid al-Adha is, we can identify Ashura. Also, if a woman is observing her iddah after her husband dies, a widow, she has to observe 4 months and 10 days as a waiting period, as a period of grief. And this cannot be identified without knowing the time, and this is known by observing the moon. Eid is means of celebration, of being happy, of trying to make the family happy by giving them gifts, by buying food, by buying new clothes, by decorating the house. All of these means are permissible because they introduce joy and celebration to the house, so that our children, our families know that Eid is different than any other day. Of course, there are things related to Eid, and the most prominent thing, which is what we will discuss today inshallah, is the issue of Eid prayer. And as you know, we are studying the chapter that deals with prayer. So Eid prayer is one of these things that we have to know and learn how to do. We move on to the first hadith. The first hadith was narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him and with his father. He said that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr and Umar, they all used to offer Salatul Eidaini before delivering the khutbah. So from this we learn that Eid prayer is composed of a prayer and it's composed of a sermon. And the scholars all agree that the sermon has to be after the khutbah. So it is unlike Jum'ah. In Friday prayer, we have the two sermons and then we have the prayer. In Eid, it's the other way around. We have the prayer and after that we have the sermon. And we will inshallah talk about more of this when we go through this chapter. Hadith number 142. Al-Bara ibn Azib, may Allah be pleased with him, said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam delivered the khutbah after offering the prayer on the day of Nahr, that is the day of slaughtering. So Eid al-Adha has another name, which is the Eid or the day of Nahr. Nahr means slaughtering. And we all know that in Eid al-Adha, part of the rituals is that you offer a sacrifice. And we will come inshallah to mention some of the rulings regarding this issue. He said, the Prophet of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam, whoever offers the prayer like us and slaughters like us, then his sacrifice, his nusuk, will be accepted by Allah. And whoever slaughters his sacrifice before the Eid prayer, then he has not done the sacrifice. Abu Burda ibn Niyar, may Allah be pleased with him, the uncle of Al-Bara, said, O Prophet of Allah, I've slaughtered my sheep before the Eid prayer, and I thought today as a day of eating and drinking, and I liked that my sheep should be the first to be slaughtered in my house. So I slaughtered my sheep and took my food before coming for the prayer. And he's asking, is this okay? Because you've just said that this is not okay. The Prophet said alayhi salatu wasalam, the sheep which you have slaughtered is just meat for eating and it is not sacrifice. So Abu Burda said, O Allah's Prophet, I have a young she-goat, a female goat, which is dearer to me than 2 sheep. Will that be sufficient as a nusuk, as a sacrifice on my behalf? The Prophet ﷺ said, yes, it will be sufficient for you, but it will not be sufficient as a nusuk or a sacrifice for anyone else after you. From this hadith, we learn a number of lessons. First of all, the Prophet ﷺ insisted on having the order. And what is the order? Pray like we have prayed, then slaughter. And he clearly emphasized this by saying, whoever slaughters before offering the prayer with us, his slaughter would not be accepted as a sacrifice. Which means that the slaughtering for Eid al-Adha, for the Eid of the slaughtering or the Eid al-Nahr, it has a time. When does the time begin? After prayer. What prayer? Fajr? After the prayer of Eid. So if someone slaughters after Fajr, before Salatul Eid, his slaughtering is not a sacrifice. This is considered to be meat for eating. He has no reward in that. So it begins after Salatul Eid. When does it end? The scholars say that you have 4 days. Eid al-Adha, which is the 10th, and then the 3 days of Tashriq, the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. By sunset of the 13th, this is the last time for you to slaughter. If you did not slaughter before the sun sets, your slaughter is not accepted as a sacrifice. So we have 4 days. And these 4 days are also days of celebration. You are allowed to listen to the duf in them. You are allowed to celebrate, as the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, these days, the days of Tashriq, are days of eating, drinking, and remembering Allah. And it is forbidden for a Muslim to fast them. The days of Tashriq, 11th, 12th, and the 13th, are forbidden for Muslims to fast them, except for pilgrims who are unable to sacrifice their hadi. They are entitled to fast 3 days in Hajj and 7 if they go back to their hometown. So the scholars say that these 4 days are forbidden to fast, as the Prophet ﷺ indicated. And they also say that those who have a habit of fasting 13th, 14th, and 15th, which are the white days, in Dhul Hijjah they cannot fast the 13th. They may fast the 14th and the 15th and any other day, but these 4 days are forbidden for them to fast. We have a short break, stay tuned, and inshallah Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. So now we know that the time of slaughtering starts after the prayer. Some scholars said that it should start after the khutbah, after the sermon, but the hadith clearly indicates that it starts after the prayer. And why is that? Because scholars say that what is mandatory is to pray the prayer. Listening to the khutbah is not mandatory. So a person who prays and leaves, this is permissible and his prayer is accepted as Eid prayer. It is recommended for him to listen, but it is not mandatory. And I would feel and believe that it would be best that a person waits at least half an hour after the end of the prayer, so that would be equivalent to the time of khutbah approximately. In the hadith, the Prophet highlighted alayhi salatu wasalam that slaughtering before is not permissible and it would not be considered as sacrifice. It is permissible, but the meat would not be rewardable. It would not be sacrifice. Abu Burda ibn Niyar, may Allah be pleased with him, he stood up and asked the Prophet ﷺ that he thought that this day is a day of eating and drinking, which is the fact. The Prophet said that the day of Eid is a day of eating and drinking. But he did not know about the issue of the slaughtering and the sacrifice must be after the prayer. So he said that after Fajr, mashallah, he slaughtered immediately and ate some of that. So the Prophet told him ﷺ that this is not acceptable sacrifice. Why? Because it was performed before time. So one of the conditions of the sacrifice, that it is to be performed on time. And from this we also learn that there is a difference between things that are not permissible to do and things that are mandatory for you to do. The things that you are told not to do, in Arabic they are called mahdhurat, things that you should avoid and not do. And the things that you are instructed to do are known in Arabic as ma'murat. So what is the difference? The scholars say, if you do something that is mahdhur, something that you were not supposed to do, out of negligence or out of forgetfulness, you have no penalty and there is nothing wrong on you. But if you do not do something you're obliged and told and instructed to do, then there is penalty for you. Whether you're sinful or not, this is beside the point. Can you give us an example? I'll give you an example. In prayer, you are told not to carry any impurity on your body, your clothes, or the place you pray in. What happens if I forgot and I pray? Scholars say your prayer is valid. What happens if, for example, as we know, in ihram, you're not permitted to clip your nails, correct? You're not permitted to cut your hair, correct? You're not permitted to put perfume, correct? You're not permitted to wear trousers. These are all known as mahdhuratul ihram, things you're not supposed to do during ihram. However, if someone does any of these things, does he have to pay expiation? The answer is no. If he had done them out of ignorance, he didn't know that he shouldn't do this, or out of forgetfulness. I'm in my ihram and someone says, would you like some perfume? I said, oh, jazakallah khair. Nice. And then, what is this? I'm not supposed to do this. Or if someone forces you at gunpoint, you have to cut your hair. And this is at gunpoint. In this case, you are exempted from paying any expiation, as scholars say. Why? Because you're not supposed to do this. You're told not to do it. Now, on the other side is what? The things that we must do. So scholars say, for example, you are told to pray after you perform wudu. So if someone forgets to perform wudu and prays, what do we say about his prayer? His prayer is invalid. He has to offer wudu and then pray again. Likewise, in Hajj, a person is obliged, he is instructed, he is ordered to make his ihram from the miqat, from the designated place for him to wear the ihram and to have his intention. If he doesn't, if he passes the miqat and after passing the miqat he makes his ihram, we tell him that you have done something that is wrong and you have to slaughter a sheep. He said, I forgot. No excuse. He said, I didn't know. We say, inshallah, you're not sinful. But to rectify what you have done, you have to slaughter a sheep. So now we learn from this hadith that things you're instructed to do, there is no compromise. Abu Burda slaughtered before time. What to do? This is not good. It would not suffice. Likewise, someone comes and says, Sheikh, I prayed the first rak'ah of Maghrib and then the Imam called for the adhan. I didn't know that it was not time yet. So we say to him, one of the conditions of prayer is that the time enters, the time is due. And because you prayed before the time was due, your prayer is invalid, you have to pray again. Among the things that we learn from this hadith, Abu Burda said, Prophet of Allah, I have a young female goat, and to me it's dearer than 2 sheep. What does that mean? Scholars explain this hadith by saying you are not permitted to sacrifice any kind of animal. There is a certain age. You can only sacrifice a camel or whatever is from the family of camels, a cow or whatever is from the family of cows, and a sheep or goat or whatever is from their tribes or from their species. Can you sacrifice a horse? Answer is no. A mule? No. Can you sacrifice a deer? The answer is no. Can I sacrifice chicken? The answer is no. These are known as bahimat al-an'am. This is the only thing that you can sacrifice. But there are conditions. There is a certain age. For example, the camel has to be at least 5 years of age or more. So if I sacrifice a 4-year-old camel, this is not accepted. And the cows, they have to be 2 years and more. So if I sacrifice a cow that is younger than that, like our friend here, then this is not accepted. And for the goats, it has to be 1 year and older. Less than 1 year is not accepted. And al-inaq here, that Abu Burda mentioned, which is dearer to him than 2 sheep, was younger than a year. So he said, O Prophet of Allah, yes, it is young. I know the age. but by Allah it is so big and huge, it has so much meat, that it is more precious to me than 2 sheep. And what is the age of accepted sheep? 6 months. So if you have sheep that is below 6 months, this is not accepted. Above 6 months, this is accepted in sacrifice. So is it okay if I slaughter it? The Prophet ﷺ made an exception for Abu Burda. And he said, only for you I will permit that you slaughter this goat that is lesser than or younger than 1 year, but this would not be sufficient or accepted from anyone else. So this is a special permit for Abu Burda from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Here in India, I know, because I receive a lot of emails and I've written something about this, that a lot of the people slaughter 1 sheep for every person of the family. So if you have in your family 10 members, they slaughter 10 sheep. And they think that this is mandatory, and it is not. The Prophet ﷺ slaughtered 2 sheep, and he said 1 or 2 rams. He said 1 on behalf of me and my household, and the other one is on behalf of my ummah, especially those who cannot afford it. So is it mandatory to slaughter a sheep for every member of the family? The answer is no. Is it recommended? Well, it's a form of charity. If you want to do it and you have the means to do it, this is permissible. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ sent his sacrifice to be sacrificed in Mecca while he was residing in Medina, and he also offered in Hajj 100 sacrifice for Hajj. Though we know that he needs only 1, he offered 100 camels. So it is permissible for you to slaughter 1 or 2 or 10 or 100 or 1,000, because all of this is for the sake of Allah. However, do not do it if you think it's mandatory. Do not do it if you don't have money, and do not do it so that people would not talk about you and say, this man, our neighbor, our friend, he is not a proper Muslim, he's not generous, he only slaughtered 1. Because this is the sunnah. If you want to do more and you have the financial means to do more, this is okay, but again you have to weigh the advantages and the disadvantages, because especially in Eid, a lot of the people have, especially the poor people, have a lot of meat. So when you give them meat, they tell you, we'd like rice, we'd like clothes, we'd like you to pay the bill of the electricity, we like medication. So it's best to vary and change rather than flood the people with meat when they have extra amounts of it. I'm afraid that this is all the time we have. Until we meet next time, fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.